Hey there, patron and a little later YouTube. Welcome back to Brian Keene's Secret Histories, the bootleg video series where we sit on the floor in my office with a shaky little iPhone and we go through each of my books in the order that they were written and published, and we talk a little bit about their origins. If you've been following along with this series, we are now in phase 3 of my career. And today, obviously, we're going to be talking about Entombed. But I need to make sure you and I both have the timeline correct in our heads. And to do that, we're going to go up here to the bookshelf. Okay? You have to remember that sometimes these books are written and it's a while before they get published. For example, we talked about The Girl in the Glider, written in some half-assed, lame-brained, seemed like a good idea to me at the time, effort to save my marriage. Cliff Notes version, that's not the way you save a marriage. Written, but then not published till like 2 years later. Gathering of Crows, written about a year before it was published. But anyway, the thing I want you to remember is Jesus and I are on the Clickers 3 tour, okay? And when I get home, I find out that my marriage is indeed ending. Girl in the Glider comes out, leader of the band, The Best of Hail Satan comes out, end of an era. Gathering of Crows comes out from Leisure, definitely the end of an era, okay? During that Clickers 3 tour, I was working on 2 books. One of them was The Damned Highway, a collaboration with Nick Mamadas. We will get to that 2 videos from now. The other thing I was working on was Entombed. Entombed was basically what The Rising was originally supposed to be. When I first wrote The Rising, the original manuscript was called More Than Infinity. Before that, if you go through my notes, and these are in the collection at the University of Pittsburgh, the stuff that I'm donating, my papers and such, there is a novel I was working on in the early 90s, around 1993, 1994, called Cabin Fever. And it's Jim from The Rising, and a lot of the characters that you would come to know later. But the premise was it's a zombie apocalypse outside and they're trapped inside. As we've talked about way back in the Rising video, my first ex-wife took off with my oldest son, and that fundamentally changed the novel. Cabin Fever became More Than Infinity. Dick Lehman, Richard Lehman helped me sell it. It then became The Rising. The rest, as they say, is history. But I always had the idea of zombie apocalypse outside. They can't go out or the zombies will eat them, but they've run out of food inside, so they're going to have to eat each other. That idea stayed with me forever and ever and ever. And finally, I had a chance to write it. I decided rather than call it Cabin Fever, I would call it Entombed, because by then the Cabin Fever horror film had come out. I didn't want people to confuse the two. I bring all this up because I wrote the first chapter of this the week before Jesus and I went on that Clickers 3 tour. And I was very, very happy with the first chapter. It's one of my favorite opening sentences of my work. I was sitting in the movie room, watching an episode of Aqua Teen Hunger Force for the 20th time and talking to the disembodied head of Dwight D. Eisenhower when the rest of the group decided that we should all start eating each other. I was so happy with that first chapter, and this would have been my next leisure book after Gathering of Crows. Jesus and I went on the tour. When I came home, everything started exploding. And it was a year that I worked on this but don't remember it. And I'm going to cop to some things now that I've never copped to. My days were spent fighting Dorchester Publishing and Leisure Books, via email, via registered letter, via public opinion, via the media. You know, our struggle made CNN, it made MSNBC, it made Fox News. It was a big deal at the time. While I was doing all that, I was also struggling personally. I was terrified that I would lose my second son the way I had lost my first. I should have known, and in hindsight, I realize how silly that fear was. My second ex-wife was nothing like the first. She would have never, ever done that to me. As I've said in other videos, she remains one of my best friends, and I am so grateful for her every day. But man, when you're first going through a divorce, you don't see any of that. Those of you who have gone through a divorce, you know. All that was going on, and then in the midst of it, that summer, my friend Joe was also going through a divorce, and we had decided to go to Nikon, and we didn't want it to become a big thing. You know, Brian Keene and Joe Hill coming to Nikon last minute, that changes the vibe and the dynamics. So they billed us as Mr. X and Mr. Y, and went to Nikon. And Mary had recently, well, she had been engaged, and then she was unengaged, and she'd been dating this guy, and she'd recently broken up with that guy. So we were both single. Mary and I had been friends for 20 years at that point. Just friends. And that weekend, you know, both of us newly single, it turned into something else. And it was probably too soon for me. And I struggled a lot and put Mary through a lot as I struggled. I should have picked better timing, but I was raw, man. I was drinking a lot. You know, there was weed, there was coke. I joke. I've said in interviews and on my podcast, you know, I've joked about cocaine, but that's a put on. Cocaine was not something I ever had a problem with. What I had a problem with was speed. And I've never talked about that publicly. But holy shit, did I love speed. I worked on this book that year, and I don't remember it. Not because I was in some alcohol speed fugue the whole time. I mean, there were times where I was very drunk working on this, but I don't remember it because I was writing it on autopilot. Later, as we talked about in our last video for the Rising Deliverance, when I crawled out of that miserable state, you know, I got the Rising Deliverance done. It was the first thing I'd written in over a year. And I was like, all right, I'm back on the horse. First thing we got to do is unfucking Entombed. And I had written a novel because I finally looked at what I'd written. I had written this novel about this guy who was slowly going insane because of everyone around him. And there's the dichotomy of these two women. And the subtext is not all that subtle, folks, and none of it was lost on me. And it was like a gut punch. I was like, oof. Am I really putting this out there in the world? Well, I owed Camelot Books the manuscript, and I owed, Deadite the version after Camelot's came out. And I'm like, all right, we gotta make this palatable. So I went through and I revised it. But I was still drinking a lot. And I've never been happy with the revisions. Had I done this completely sober, there are a lot of things in that book that I would have changed. But, I guess that's the way with alcohol. You say, oh man, if only I'd been sober, but you don't get to go back and do that, So, yeah, this is one, I've never gone back and referenced it in any of my other works. I've referenced the bomb shelter that it takes place in, but I haven't referenced the characters. It's, obviously it's part of the Labyrinth mythos, but it's not something we'll need to revisit. It's set in the world of Dead Sea. I'm always surprised and sort of shocked when readers tell me that this is their personal favorite. And that's happened more than I ever imagined it would. There is a really good novel in here, but this isn't that version, So, I don't know. Maybe I'm just too close to it. Maybe I read too much into it because I know what went into it. It makes me uncomfortable to know that this one's out there. But what can you do, right? A little bit about the bomb shelter. That's actually a real thing. If you go to the Greenbrier Hotel in White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia, you can actually take tours of that shelter. I took several tours, and several of the employees there were more than happy to give me some behind the scenes access and really delve into the history of the place and what it would be like to actually be stuck there. But yeah, let's get to some happy shit. Let's look at these editions, okay? First of all, look at this. Now, actually, let's start here. This is the Camelot Books edition. Glenn Chadbourne's art. Love Glenn's stuff. So happy to have him on this. 500 numbered copies and 52 specially bound lettered copies. Okay. That was Gak doing the front cover, by the way. My dear friend Gak, who had been there since the beginning with 4x4. Gak would do this cover and the cover to the limited edition of The Damned Highway. And he passed after that. So these are two of the last things Gak ever did. We went to that first because one of these is a prototype and one of them is the actual lettered edition. And for the life of me, I can't remember which one is which. So I'm just going to show you both. And those of you on Patreon watching this, I'm sure you will sing off in the comments and tell me which one's the actual lettered edition. But look at that. I mean, just look at that. Just gorgeous, gorgeous books. So that's one edition. And then here's the other edition. And they both have, the same stamp. I'm guessing this one must be the prototype because that one has the art insert. Yeah, this must be the prototype, I'm guessing. But hey, maybe I'm wrong. But yeah, just gorgeous, gorgeous books. And then, of course, we already showed you the Camelot hardcover. And then Deadite did their trade paperback and ebook edition. And now I love Alan Clark's work. And I'm not casting shade on Alan Clark. This has never been my favorite cover. I like what Alan was going for here. In fact, in prepping for this video, I noticed something about this cover that I've never noticed before. And that is the dichotomy here. Because our protagonist in this book, and that shows you how checked out I am on this novel. I don't even remember the protagonist's name. But, he's a man who's literally being torn in two by the forces around him. And Alan captured that, and I never noticed that until I was sitting down to do this video. I don't know. I don't like the proportions and the perspective here. But I love Alan's work. This just isn't my favorite. Okay, no shade on Alan though. But yeah, that's the Deadite edition. People over the years have asked me about the dedication, so let's turn to the dedication. This one is for Sultan White and Wrath James White, with the hopes of many more zombie Christmases to come. What does that mean? All right, well, Wrath James White, one of my oldest and dearest friends in this business, at least of those still left alive. And when Wrath's son Sultan was 10 years old, Wrath had him for Christmas. And for Christmas Eve, Wrath let him open one present, and it was The Rising by Uncle Brian. And Sultan stayed up the entire night Christmas Eve, and I if I remember correctly, missed Christmas morning, like slept in late on Christmas morning because he'd been up all night reading The Rising. And both of them have said it was the best Christmas they ever had. Sultan is now a remarkable young man and a very good writer in his own right. He did a collaboration with his dad, and now his first solo novel is out. You should definitely check out his stuff. But I remember when Wrath told me that, I was so touched, as a father who was also used to, you have to share the Christmas. Some Christmases you have your kids, some you don't. That meant the world to me, that something I wrote was able to give them that bonding experience. So that's where the dedication came from. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is Entombed. My cocaine book, as I like to refer to it jokingly, but it wasn't cocaine. It was depression and stress and alcohol and speed. Anyway, next time, we're going to take a little detour. We're going to talk about fast zombies and why they suck. And then coming up in future videos, we've got The Damned Highway, A Conspiracy of One, Alone, Earthworm Gods 2, Deluge, and many, many more. I appreciate you watching these, whether you're watching them on Patreon or whether you're watching them a month or two later on YouTube. Know that I appreciate you. Peace.